A murder weapon that vanished without a trace, yet the victim lies dead. Welcome to WordScript Den. I am your host, Denora. Tell me where you're tuning in from. I treasure reading your comments. Now let's begin. It was a Tuesday afternoon, which meant Nero Wolfe was busy pretending the world didn't exist. He was in the plant rooms upstairs, nursing his orchids like a mother hen with 100 squawking chicks, while I was down in the office trying to decide whether to file the week's bills alphabetically or by the degree of profanity Wolfe had used when signing the checks. Before I could decide, the doorbell rang. Now, the doorbell at the brownstone isn't just a sound, it's a disturbance in the natural order. People aren't supposed to show up uninvited, not unless they've got either a fortune to spend or a mess too big to mop. I opened the door expecting neither, and instead found a woman who looked like she had been vacuum-sealed in steel nerves. She was tall, angular, late 30s maybe, with a sharp coat and sharper eyes. She didn't wait for me to say good afternoon before announcing herself. "My name is Constance Hay. I need to see Nero Wolfe immediately." I gave her the kind of smile that usually sends people back down the steps. Wolfe doesn't do immediately. He doesn't even do soon. Around here, the word is eventually, and even that requires a bribe in the form of food, cash, or a problem that insults his sense of order. But Miss Hay, or Mrs., or maybe General, the way she stood, didn't flinch. She looked like someone who had never accepted a delay in her life. I ushered her in, figuring if Wolfe threw me out on my ear for interrupting his orchids, at least I'd go down for a worthy cause. We sat in the office and I called upstairs. 10 minutes later, Wolfe came lumbering in, puffing like a reluctant god forced down to earth, and lowered himself into the red leather chair with a grunt. Miss Hay wasted no time. "I am not here about money, Mr. Wolfe. I am here about something far more serious." Wolfe gave her a look that could have been carved from marble. "Pray continue." She leaned forward. "A knife has gone missing. A very particular knife. It disappeared from my brother's study 3 nights ago. He insists it must have been misplaced, but I know better. That knife was important. It cannot be found. And the fact that it is missing is no accident." I raised a brow. "People misplace umbrellas, glasses, maybe wedding rings if they're careless. Knives? Not usually headline material." But Wolfe's eyes, those half-shut lids that miss nothing, flickered. What, madam, was distinctive about this knife? Her lips pressed into a line. It was not a weapon, at least not in the ordinary sense. It was a family relic. Hand in the wrong hands, it could do great harm. Not physically, but reputationally. That last word was Wolfe's catnip. Reputations. The moral high ground. Human folly dressed as dignity. He shifted a fraction in his chair, which in Wolfe speak was the equivalent of lunging across the desk. "You are suggesting theft, Miss Hay, but you refuse to name the thief. You insist upon the object's significance, but you cloak it in ambiguity. I find such postures intolerable." She flushed but didn't retreat. "I am suggesting more than theft, Mr. Wolfe. I am suggesting that whoever took it will not stop here. And if you do not help me, something far worse than a missing knife will follow. That hung in the air like cigar smoke." Wolfe closed his eyes, steepled his fingers, and groaned softly. "I detest knives, madam. They are crude implements, better suited to the kitchen than the parlor. Still, you have contrived to intrude upon my afternoon. Archie, fetch Miss Hay a glass of sherry. She is to tell us everything, no omissions, no equivocations." And just like that, the sanctity of the brownstone had been disturbed. And Wolfe, against his better judgment, had decided to listen. "Would you like me to continue directly into Section 2, the brownstone disturbed, next? Or pause here so you can refine details, like Miss Hay's background, the knife symbolism, or the circle of suspects?" I poured the sherry with the efficiency of a man who's had to play butler more often than he'd care to admit, and Miss Hay took the glass like it was a prop in a courtroom rather than a refreshment. Wolfe gave her his usual half-lidded stare, waiting for her to get on with it. The silence in the office was the kind that grows heavier the longer it lasts. I perched on the edge of my desk, ready to keep the record straight and the client honest. She swirled the sherry once, then set it down untouched, her fingers clasping tight around the stem as if she might crush the glass. "The knife belonged to my father. He was a collector of antiquities, obsessed with objects that carried a story. This particular knife was a 15th century ceremonial piece, Italian in origin. It had been in our family for nearly a century. And though my brother dismisses it as a curiosity, I know its significance. And its danger. Wolfe twitched an eyebrow. Danger is a broad term. Clarify. She leaned in, her voice lower. The knife is inscribed with a family crest, not meant for public knowledge. If certain parties outside the family become aware of it, my brother's reputation and mine would be compromised beyond repair. It could undo years of influence, association, trust. Now that was an unusual spin. Family crests don't usually bring men down in New York, unless the men in question have secrets engraved deeper than their silverware. Wolfe let her words sink in, then asked, "Why come to me, madam? Surely the police would be more appropriate for recovering a trinket." She almost laughed, but stopped herself. The police? To them it would be just a stolen antique. To me it is an omen, and I believe whoever took it intends to use it, not for violence but for leverage. That was the first honest thing she had said, and Wolfe heard it. He closed his eyes briefly, then opened them, as if conceding a chess move. "You believe your brother is vulnerable?" She nodded sharply. "He is a man of position, public. His reputation is everything. If this object is paraded before the wrong eyes, he will be finished." I couldn't resist. "Lady, plenty of men in this town survive without a coat of arms to their name." But she turned to me, cold fire in her look. "Not my brother. He has enemies, quiet ones, patient ones. They would use this." Wolfe grunted, and I knew that meant the hook had lodged. He didn't care about reputations, but he did care about manipulation, leverage, and the games people play when they think they're cleverer than they are. "Very well," he said. "Your description has merit, but you must provide me with facts. Who had access to this knife? Who knew of its significance, and why you, rather than your brother, have come to me?" She hesitated, the kind of pause that tells you the truth is about to land hard. "My brother does not know I am here. He refuses to admit the knife was stolen. He claims it will turn up, but 3 nights ago there were 4 people at his house for dinner. 4 who might have had both knowledge and opportunity. And of those 4, at least 2 have reason to see him undone." That got Wolfe to shift again. The great bulk of him rearranged in the chair like a mountain resettling after a tremor. "Names," he said flatly. Her jaw tightened. There was Dr. Edwin Greaves, an historian who had studied the knife years ago. My brother's partner in business, Leonard Fisk, who has always resented him. A woman named Harriet Vale, a patron of the arts and, well, an admirer of my brother in the past. And finally, Charles Alcott, a lawyer with a long memory and no shortage of grudges. She gave them like charges on an indictment. Wolfe nodded once. "Archie, you will call upon these individuals. Secure their accounts. Miss Hay, you will provide their addresses, circumstances, and any detail you neglected in this compressed recital." I pulled a notebook from the drawer and started scribbling, though I kept my eyes on her. She was sweating just enough to notice, and her hand shook when she lifted the glass at last. That told me she wasn't here for a family heirloom. She was here because someone had already whispered a threat, and she was desperate enough to drag Wolfe from his orchids. Wolfe leaned back, folding his hands across his middle. "Madam, I detest being maneuvered, but you have maneuvered yourself into my office, and now you are in my charge. You will tell me the full story, or I shall terminate this farce forthwith." Her lips parted, then closed again, and I saw the flash of fear she tried to smother. She set the glass down and looked straight at Wolfe. "There is more, much more. But if I say it now, I may never walk out of here alive." The office went still. I looked at Wolfe, expecting him to dismiss her as melodramatic. Instead, he regarded her with a grim patience. "It seems, madam, that you have compelled my attention. Archie, we shall proceed with caution. Proceed with caution." And just like that, the brownstone wasn't a sanctuary anymore. It was the first battlefield. She sat rigid in her chair, and for a moment I thought she'd bolt, but Wolfe wasn't the type to let a client unravel without extracting the thread he wanted. He waited, motionless, while she stared into the polished surface of his desk as if the truth might appear there. Finally she spoke, her voice lower than before, but sharp enough to cut the air. 3 days ago, before the dinner, a letter arrived at my brother's house. It was unsigned, typed, and brief. It said only, "The knife will be used, be ready." My brother dismissed it as a prank. I did not. When the knife disappeared the same evening, I knew it was no prank. She pulled a folded sheet from her bag and placed it on Wolfe's blotter. Wolfe didn't touch it. He just gestured for me to collect it. I opened it and read. The words were, as she said, Nothing fancy, but the kind of plainness that gets under your skin. Whoever wrote it had no interest in theatrics, only in making sure the message landed. Wolfe closed his eyes briefly, then opened them, as if to test the weight of the silence. This letter changes the context, madam. It is not a trinket, nor even merely a lever of reputation. It is a threat, vague yet pointed. Such things are intolerable. He turned his head slightly. Archie, secure that letter in the safe. Then begin tomorrow with the historian, Dr. Greaves. A man who covets knowledge of relics is often reckless in his desire. Miss Hay started to protest, then stopped, realizing Wolfe wasn't giving her a choice. Still, she leaned forward, her composure breaking. Mr. Wolfe, you don't understand. Whoever has it, if they expose what is on that knife, my brother will not survive the scandal. It will not only ruin him, it may ruin me. Wolfe puffed his cheeks and released the air slowly, a sign of his mounting impatience. Madam, what I understand is that you are withholding the essence. The crest, the significance. Without it, my analysis is stunted. She gripped the arms of her chair. If I tell you it will not leave this room, Wolfe's tone dropped to granite. Nothing leaves this room that I do not permit. She bit her lip, then exhaled. The crest on that knife is not our family's. It belongs to a society, a group whose dealings were never meant for daylight. My father came into possession of it through questionable means, and he kept it hidden. If it is revealed, there are men, powerful men, who will know and they will act. My brother's position depends on them not knowing. That explained the fear in her eyes and the tremor in her hand. It also explained why she hadn't gone to the police. A scandal tied to secret societies was not the sort of thing you file a report on without consequences. I looked at Wolfe, wondering if this was too far outside his usual diet of domestic squabbles and financial feuds. But Wolfe's gaze had sharpened. He smelled the game, and that was enough. Archie will conduct inquiries, Wolfe said, each word slow and deliberate. You will provide him with introductions where needed, but you will not accompany him. You will remain available, here if necessary, to clarify points. He shifted, settling deeper into the chair as if the weight of the case was now properly in his hands. The knife is bait, madam. Bait demands a trap. Her eyes flickered, half relief, half dread. I knew then we were committed, because when Wolfe starts using words like bait and trap, it means he's already mapping the board. She stood, adjusting her coat with a jerky movement. I will give you all the information I can, but, Mr. Wolfe, be careful. Whoever has taken the knife is not a thief in the ordinary sense. They are someone who believes they are owed. She left with a stiffness that made me think she was bracing herself for something worse. I closed the door behind her and returned to the office. Wolfe had his eyes shut, but I could tell his mind was busy stripping her words for sense and contradiction. Well, I said, that was a cheery introduction. A stolen knife, 4 suspects, and a secret society. Want me to bring in Saul, or should I just start knocking on doors? Wolfe opened his eyes just enough to look at me. Saul will be summoned if necessity arises. For now you will attend to Dr. Greaves. His interest is academic, which means it is insatiable. Indulge him, press him, and observe his contradictions. Report thoroughly. I nodded, sliding the letter into the safe as instructed. The brownstone was quiet again, but the kind of quiet that hides a storm. Wolfe reached for the bell cord to summon beer, and I knew that meant he had already accepted the intrusion. The sanctity of the brownstone had been violated, and the game had begun. The next morning I set out with Wolfe's instructions echoing in my head, and while I didn't share his enthusiasm for antique knives or clandestine crests, I did appreciate the straightforwardness of the assignment. Dr. Edwin Greaves lived uptown in a brownstone of his own, though his was less fortress and more mausoleum, judging by the ivy curling over the facade and the dust cloud that erupted when I pressed the bell. He answered himself, which told me either he couldn't afford help or he trusted no one to handle his door. He was a wiry man with spectacles perched halfway down his nose, a pair of eyes that twitched with perpetual irritation, and fingers stained with ink. I introduced myself, and when I mentioned Nero Wolfe, his irritation gave way to curiosity. Ah yes, the great gourmand who dabbles in deduction. What could he possibly want with me? I smiled, nothing yet, but I could use your help in clearing up a matter about an old knife, 15th century Italian. I thought his pupils might dilate like a man glimpsing buried treasure. He gestured me inside without a word. The interior was what you'd expect. bookshelves straining under weight they were never built for, piles of papers teetering on every surface, and the faint aroma of old vellum. He led me to a cramped study and cleared a chair with a sweep of his arm. "The knife," he said, his voice cracking into a higher register. "I studied it years ago when it was in Mr. Hayes' possession. A fascinating artifact, though I was never permitted to publish my findings. I kept my tone casual. You knew it had a crest?" He glanced at me sharply, of course. The crest was the only reason it mattered. An obscure Italian brotherhood, long defunct or so history claims. "Why do you ask?" "Because the knife isn't where it's supposed to be," I said. "Someone took it 3 nights ago." The color drained from his face. His hands fidgeted, first clenching, then smoothing the edge of his desk blotter. "That is most unfortunate, but surely it has only been misplaced." I gave him a look that said he wasn't fooling me. "Dr. Greaves, you strike me as a man who values accuracy. So let's be accurate. You knew what the crest implied. You knew it could be dangerous if revealed. Did you ever share that knowledge?" His tongue darted over his lips. "Academic circles are small, Mr. Goodwin. Conversations happen. But I never spoke of the Hay connection." He was sweating now, and I decided to press the sore spot. "Yet you admit you studied the knife. You knew its value wasn't monetary but reputational. Did that make you want it? To own it or maybe use it?" He shot to his feet, indignant. "How dare you imply—" I stayed seated, cool as a cucumber. "Sit down, Doctor. I'm not the one you need to impress. I'm just the delivery boy. If you've got something to hide, better it comes out now than later when Wolfe peels it off you like wallpaper." He faltered, then sank back down, his defiance collapsing into a mutter. "I did not take it, but I know one who might have." He tapped his finger nervously against the armrest. "Leonard Fisk. That man has envied the Hays for decades. If anyone had motive, it was him. That sounded rehearsed, a little too neat. I jotted it in my notebook anyway. When I stood, he made a half-hearted attempt at civility. Offering me tea I had no intention of drinking. I left him pacing his study like a rat in a maze. Back at the brownstone, Wolfe listened with his eyes closed while I gave the report. When I finished, he spoke without opening them. "Greaves is anxious, too anxious. He knows more than he will say. But note, he attempted to direct suspicion outward. That is the act of a man with a conscience pricked or a secret guarded." I set my notebook down. "So what's next?" Wolfe reached for the beer Fritz had set by his elbow. "Next, Archie, you will see Fisk. If envy is his motive, he will betray it. But exercise caution. Men who covet long enough sometimes cease to distinguish between desire and entitlement." He took a long pull from the glass, the foam clinging to his lips, and I knew the gears in his mind were grinding toward a conclusion only he could see. The knife was missing. The suspects were lining up, and already the walls of the brownstone felt tighter. Something had shifted. The storm was drawing closer. Leonard Fisk lived in a high-rise apartment that smelled of expensive cigars and newer money, trying to pretend it was old. The doorman gave me the once-over, but let me through after I said my name like it was supposed to mean something. Fisk answered the door himself, a tall man with thinning hair slicked back so carefully it looked like he polished it. His handshake was firm in the way men use to prove they aren't afraid of anything, but his eyes darted around like he'd misplaced a witness. We sat in a living room that was too glossy for comfort. Everything gleamed, from the leather furniture to the crystal decanter he poured his drink from. He didn't offer me one, which put him in the running for least hospitable suspect of the week. I explained why I was there, keeping Wolfe's name out of it until necessary. When I mentioned the knife, his mouth twitched as if he'd bitten into a lemon. "The knife. Of course, Constance must have sent you. That woman always did have a taste for melodrama." I leaned back. "Funny, she said something similar about you, minus the melodrama. More envy, more resentment." He stiffened, then gave a dry laugh. "Resentment? Envy? Perhaps once, when we were young men and her brother was given every advantage, while I scraped for recognition. But I have no need of a medieval relic to soothe my pride. That was smooth but not convincing." He spoke like a man who'd practiced his lines, polishing them until the edges gleamed as bright as his cufflinks. I decided to scuff them. "Dr. Greaves seems to think otherwise. He implied you might have helped yourself to the knife." His drink stopped halfway to his lips. "Greaves? That pedant. He's jealous of anyone who actually achieves something outside of footnotes. He'd see me in ruin if it meant another lecture gig." If he said that, then I say this, look closer at him. He has always lusted after that knife. I would never risk touching it. Not now, not now. 2 words that hung in the air heavier than the smoke from his cigar. He caught my look and tried to cover himself. What I mean is, the knife isn't valuable, not to me. To be caught with it would mean scandal, not gain. Only a fool would want it. I stood, brushing imaginary lint off my sleeve. Then I suppose you'll have no objection if Wolfe decides to have a word with you later. That got his attention. His hand tightened on the glass and his eyes narrowed. Wolfe, so this is his doing. Tell him I will not be paraded like some petty thief. If he wishes to speak with me, he will do so properly. I didn't bother answering. Leaving him there, stiff-backed and rattled, told me more than his words had. On the way back downtown, I filed Fisk under dangerous because he thinks he's careful. When I gave Wolfe the rundown, he listened in silence, eyes half closed, fingers steepled. At length he said, Fisk resents, but he fears exposure more. Greaves is nervous, but he points outward too eagerly. Both attempt to divert. This is instructive. I asked if we should press them harder, but Wolfe shook his head. No, we must not exhaust them yet. We shall allow them the comfort of believing they have controlled their narratives. When the trap is sprung, their own words will bind them. He rang for Fritz, and when the tray arrived with beer, Wolfe drank with deliberate satisfaction. Then he added, Tomorrow, Archie, you will see Harriet Vale. Charm her, provoke her, but above all watch her. A woman scorned is a blade sharper than any relic. I leaned back in my chair, notebook on my knee, and caught the glint in his eye. The knife was missing, but Wolfe was already sharpening something else, the net, and as usual, I was the one carrying it into the lion's den. Harriet Vale lived in one of those townhouses that managed to look both grand and precarious, as though one strong wind might topple it, but the curtains would still hang in perfect folds. She answered the door herself, dressed in something pale that made her look softer than I suspected she really was. Her eyes measured me the way a buyer sizes up a painting, deciding whether it belongs in her collection or back on the street. I gave her my name, and when I mentioned I was inquiring about the Hay dinner party, her mouth twitched with an expression that might have been amusement or maybe irritation disguised as charm. She let me in without another word. The sitting room was a study in carefully maintained elegance, expensive without being vulgar. She poured herself a drink and offered me one with a smile that said she already knew I'd refuse. I stayed standing while she arranged herself on the sofa, one arm draped like she was posing for a portrait. You've come about the knife, haven't you? She said, not asking so much as daring me to deny it. I didn't. Instead, I said, You seem awfully sure that's what this is about. Most people pretend they don't know until I bring it up. Her laugh was low, practiced. Most people aren't me. Of course it's about the knife. Constance Hay would never let something like that go quietly. That earned her a raised eyebrow from me. You know Constance pretty well, then. She waved a hand. Enough to know she guards her family's secrets like a miser guards coins. The knife is one of them. And if it's missing, then she's terrified. I let the silence hang and she filled it, sipping her drink before continuing. The dinner was tense, Mr. Goodwin. My invitation was an afterthought. I knew it the moment I arrived. Constance didn't want me there. Her brother, he did. He always did. That was the kind of personal confession that didn't come without purpose. I asked, And did that give you reason to take the knife? Her smile sharpened. I don't steal trophies, Mr. Goodwin. If I wanted revenge, I'd take it directly. And believe me, if I had, Constance would already know. There was steel under the silk, no mistake about it. She leaned forward then, her voice dropping. The one you should be watching is Charles Alcott. He has the temperament for this kind of game. He carries grudges like jewels in his pocket. The knife would be his idea of leverage. That made 3 for 3. Every suspect eager to toss the blame like a hot coal. I made a note, though I kept my tone light. You seem awfully eager to point fingers. Her eyes glittered. That's because I know how this works. Constance won't rest until she finds someone to accuse, and I don't intend for it to be me. I thanked her for the drink I hadn't taken and left her lounging on the sofa, watching me like a cat watches the door close on a mouse. Outside, the air felt cleaner, but I knew I was carrying her words like smoke in my coat. Back at the brownstone, Wolfe listened with his usual immobility, though the way his mouth pressed into a thinner line told me he wasn't charmed by Harriet Vale's performance. He said, A woman scorned is dangerous, yes, but a woman defensive is more so. She took pains to place suspicion elsewhere. That makes her valuable, if not trustworthy. He closed his eyes then, steepling his fingers. Archie, tomorrow you will attend to Alcott. His grievances are the oldest, and thus the most combustible. Approach him not as an accuser, but as an observer. Let him speak, and he will betray himself. I jotted the note, though I didn't need reminding. Each visit was drawing me closer to the center of something that felt less like a simple theft and more like a fuse burning toward its charge. Wolfe was already setting his net, and I was the one tightening the cords. The knife had vanished, but what it cut open was just beginning to show. Charles Alcott's office sat on the 12th floor of a building that prided itself on its polished marble lobby and brass elevators. The secretary at the front desk looked at me like I was the morning's disturbance, but when I dropped Alcott's name and added Nero Wolfe's for good measure, she relented and ushered me through. Alcott was standing by the window when I entered, a tall, lean man in a tailored suit, his posture stiff as though he'd been cut from oak. His handshake was dry and brief, his smile absent. He motioned for me to sit, though he didn't. You're here about the Hay relic, aren't you? His voice was clipped, each word landing like a gavel. I didn't bother pretending otherwise. That knife's been making the rounds faster than gossip at a bridge table. He turned from the window and finally faced me. It should never have left its case. That it did is proof enough of what I've always said. Hubert Hay is careless with things he does not deserve to own. I asked him if he had any idea who might have taken it. He gave a short, humorless laugh. Anyone with a memory longer than 10 years. That knife is not merely a relic. It's a reminder. Hubert's father took it without right, without honor. There are men, myself among them, who have not forgotten, who have not forgotten. That was the first time in this circus of suspects that someone had spoken without hesitation, and it carried the ring of conviction. Still, conviction isn't the same as confession. I leaned forward. So you're admitting motive? He stiffened, his jaw tightening. I'm admitting nothing more than truth. Motive implies intent, and intent implies action. I have taken no action. His eyes glittered with something too sharp to be simple indignation. I decided to needle him. Funny thing, everyone else I've spoken to has been quick to point the finger at someone else. You seem content to point at Hubert. Makes me wonder if you're the only one telling it straight, or if you're the only one clever enough to hide it. His hand clenched at his side, then released slowly. I will not justify myself to you, Mr. Goodwin. If Wolfe wishes to speak with me, he may summon me. Until then, I suggest you leave speculation to the newspapers. It was as close to throwing me out as a lawyer could manage, without breaking decorum. I stood, thanked him with a smile that meant nothing, and walked out, filing away the fact that Alcott's anger wasn't just old, it was raw. Back at the brownstone, I laid out the conversation while Wolfe sat behind his desk, eyes half closed, fingers tapping once against his armrest. When I finished, he let out a long breath through his nose. Alcott is dangerous not because he dissembles, but because he believes himself righteous. He would not steal for gain. He would steal to redress a wrong. That makes him the most formidable of all. I asked him if he thought Alcott had the knife. Wolfe's eyes opened, steady and cold. He may or he may not. But whether he holds it or another does, the knife itself is now less important than what it awakens. Resentment, envy, longing, all have been stirred and all are combustible. Fritz entered then with a tray of beer, and Wolfe took a glass, lifting it like a judge preparing to pronounce sentence. Archie, the knife is bait, yes, but it is also pretext. Whoever has taken it intends more than possession. They intend revelation, and when they act it will not be subtle. He drank, then set the glass down with finality. You will prepare, Archie. I will soon call them all here. One by one they attempt to deflect. Together in this room, their contradictions will betray them. The brownstone had gone quiet again, but I knew it was the kind of quiet that comes just before the snap of a trap. Wolfe had started arranging the pieces, and soon enough the players would be dragged onto the board whether they liked it or not. The following evening, Wolfe decided it was time to stir the water. He hadn't yet sounded the gong to summon every suspect into the office. That treat was still to come. But he had me make calls. One to Greaves, one to Fisk, one to Harriet Vale, and finally one to Alcott. The instructions were carefully worded. Not demands, not even invitations. Just a suggestion that Wolfe required clarifications, each at different times. None of them would risk declining, not once Wolfe's name was on the line, and I knew Wolfe wasn't after clarifications at all. He was after the tremors caused by making them believe the circle was tightening. The first to arrive was Greaves, looking more harried than before. He perched on the edge of the red leather chair like a sparrow waiting for the cat to blink. Wolfe sat back, silent, letting him wriggle. Greaves blurted that he had thought further on the matter, and perhaps he had misremembered. Perhaps the knife's crest was not as damning as he first implied. Wolfe's lids didn't flicker. Madam Hay has already supplied the context. Your equivocation is useless. Greaves flushed, mopped his forehead with a handkerchief, and left not long after, sweatier than he'd arrived. An hour later, Fisk came, taut and defensive, asking why his name was being tossed about like so much refuse. Wolfe let him rant until he tripped on his own words, insisting first that he had no use for the knife, then seconds later, that if it surfaced, he could explain why it might naturally have been in his possession. Wolfe cut him off with a single rumble of "Noted, Mr. Fisk." That was enough to send him storming out with his dignity dented. Harriet Vale appeared in the late afternoon, wrapped in perfume and poise. She glided into the office, all smiles, but Wolfe's stare stripped the polish. She admitted with a little shrug that yes, she had argued with Constance at dinner, but it was trivial, nothing to do with knives or crests. Wolfe asked her why then. She had been so eager to deflect suspicion toward Alcott. Her smile faltered for just a heartbeat, then returned like a mask. Because, she said, I know Charles Alcott better than you think, and you'd be wise to listen. She left with grace, but I saw the tension in her shoulders as she passed me. Finally, Alcott arrived, grim as ever. He stood through most of the exchange, declining Wolfe's offer of a chair as if to prove his independence. He made no denial of his resentment, but again insisted he had not taken the knife. When Wolfe pressed him on why he had not, if he truly believed Hubert Hay unworthy, Alcott's jaw clenched, because justice does not require theft. Wolfe inclined his head, as if acknowledging a fellow craftsman. Alcott left with his pride intact, but his anger more visible than before. When the last door had closed behind him, Wolfe exhaled heavily, as though he had endured a day of unpleasant but necessary medication. He turned to me. Each one has betrayed themselves. Greaves by his fear, Fisk by his contradictions, Vale by her protestations, Alcott by his righteousness. The knife is less elusive than they think. It has already declared its purpose. I asked him if that meant he knew who had it. He looked at me, eyes steady and cold. I know enough, Archie, enough to tighten the snare. Tomorrow we prepare. The time has come to gather them all in this room, to strip their pretenses, and to extract the truth. He rang for Fritz, and as the beer was poured, the air in the brownstone felt heavier, as though the walls themselves were bracing for the storm. The knife was still absent, but the battle over it was now moving directly into Wolfe's sanctum. And if there's one thing I've learned, it's that no one leaves here unchanged once Wolfe begins to close his net. The next evening, the brownstone felt less like a home and more like a stage, and Wolfe was both playwright and director. Fritz fussed about, tightening the order of the chairs in Wolfe's office while I checked the invitations we'd sent out. Each suspect had been told to arrive at 8 sharp. Wolfe disliked staggered entrances. He preferred his audience assembled in one sweep, so their glances and silences could tangle themselves into evidence. When the doorbell finally began its steady chorus, I ushered them in one by one. Greaves was first, jumpy and pale, clutching a leather portfolio as if it might shield him. Fisk followed, stiff and seething, his eyes darting about as though he might catalogue the bookshelves for hidden judgments. Harriet Vale arrived last of the trio, composed and scented, her smile practiced, her gaze sharp. Alcott came in moments after, tall and grim, carrying himself like a man who despised the necessity, but would not shirk it. Wolfe sat already in his chair, mountainous, motionless, his hands steepled on his stomach. He didn't rise, didn't greet them beyond a curt nod. When they were seated, he began. You were all present at the Hay residence when an object of peculiar significance vanished. You have since been indulging yourselves in diversions, denials, and accusations. I have tolerated your evasions long enough. You are here because the time for diversion has ended. The words hung heavy. No one moved. Then Fisk leaned forward, his voice sharp. Are you accusing us? Wolfe's eyes barely flickered. I accuse nothing, Mr. Fisk, I expose. He shifted his gaze to Greaves. Dr. Greaves, you quailed because your scholarship became knowledge withheld. You feared being known as the man who unearthed more than he should. You sought to redirect, but in your hesitation you betrayed your familiarity with the knife's power. Greaves sputtered, his hand fumbling with his handkerchief, but Wolfe had already turned. Mrs. Vale, your eagerness to cast suspicion on Mr. Alcott was not protective instinct. It was calculated distraction. Your grievance is personal, your methods indirect, but your fear was plain. Fear not of theft, but of implication. Her lips parted, but the smile she had worn slipped at last, replaced by something taut and cold. Still she said nothing, letting the silence fight her battle. Then Wolfe's eyes fell upon Alcott, who straightened but did not flinch. Mr. Alcott, your resentment is an inheritance you wear like a robe. You do not steal for gain, you scorn it. Yet your conviction, so loudly proclaimed, is the surest sign you would seize the knife if only to restore what you call honor. Alcott's jaw flexed, but his voice remained steady. I told you I did not take it. Justice requires no theft. Wolfe allowed that to linger, then spoke again, his tone heavier now. But the knife is not merely missing. It has been used. Miss Hay has confided the nature of the threat. Whoever holds it intends to leverage, to expose, to ruin. That is the true crime, and that is why you are here. The room bristled. Eyes cut sideways, mouths tightened. I watched each of them, noting the twitch of Fisk's hand on his knee, the tremor in Greaves' fingers, the narrowed glare of Harriet Vale, the rigid stillness of Alcott. Wolfe's gaze swept over them all and settled into silence, as though waiting for one to crumble beneath the weight. Crumble beneath the weight. Crumble. The tension filled the air like smoke. I had seen it before. Wolfe saying little, letting silence ferment into revelation. And I knew the moment was approaching when one of them would break. When the missing knife would stop being an absence and start being an accusation sharp as steel, ready to cut the truth free. The silence stretched until it felt like the walls themselves might groan under it. I'd seen Wolfe pull this stunt 100 times, letting quiet do the heavy lifting, but even I felt the urge to break it. Then it happened. Greaves coughed into his fist, the sound sharp, guilty, and when no one responded, words tumbled after it. I never wanted it for myself, he blurted, his voice higher than usual. I only wanted to study it, to publish the truth of it. If I'd taken it, I would have displayed it, not hidden it. His gaze darted toward Fisk, quick as lightning, and Wolfe's eyes followed the movement. Fisk leaned forward, scowling. There it is. Always trying to drag me into your fantasies, Greaves. If anyone here has the obsession to steal, it's you. You'd trade your reputation for a footnote in history. Harriet Vale let out a low laugh, the kind that slices rather than soothes. Oh, please. Both of you are too transparent. You're academics and businessmen, not thieves. Whoever took it had more at stake. She turned her eyes on Alcott, and her smile returned, brittle and sharp. Fair man who speaks of justice that often usually has blood on his hands. Alcott rose halfway from his chair, his voice cutting like a whip. Enough. I will not be accused by the likes of you. The knife may have been misused, but not by me. Wolfe raised a single finger, and the room stilled. Say it, Mr. Alcott. Alcott obeyed, though stiffly. Wolfe's voice came measured, heavy with finality. Each of you has attempted to deflect, and in doing so you have provided more than denial. You have supplied me with sequence, motive, and method. The knife was not taken by a scholar lusting for knowledge, nor by a businessman clinging to old envy, nor by a woman scorning her rival. It was taken by one who believes himself ordained to wield it, as symbol, as weapon, as justice. His gaze fell squarely on Alcott. You, sir. Alcott's face did not crumble. It hardened, carved from stone. He spoke slowly, deliberately. If I had it, and I do not confess that I do, then it would only be because Hubert Hay deserves to be exposed. His family stole what was not theirs, and that knife is proof. If its revelation brings him ruin, then it is no more than his due. That was as close to confession as Wolfe required. He leaned back, fingers steepled, eyes closed in grim satisfaction. The law may not seize upon your righteousness, Mr. Alcott, but the truth has already condemned you. The others shifted, some in relief, some in disgust, but Wolfe did not permit them further voice. Archie, he said, dismiss them. I ushered them out one by one, the tension clinging to them like smoke from a fire not yet doused. When the last door shut, I returned to Wolfe. He hadn't moved, only opened his eyes enough to regard me. The knife was never the true weapon, Archie. Pride was. And pride cuts deeper than steel. He reached for his beer, and Fritz, sensing the moment, brought in the tray. The brownstone settled back into its silence, but the echo of the evening lingered. The knife was still missing, yes, but its edge had already drawn blood. The kind no one could see. But everyone in that room had felt. Now, generate the final section of the story, ensuring a satisfying resolution. Maintain the logical progression of clues and character arcs, delivering the final reveal smoothly while keeping the ending impactful and true to the detective style. The following morning, the brownstone had recovered its usual quiet, though I knew Wolfe's mind was still grinding through the details. He had dismissed Alcott and the others the night before with a precision that left no one doubting his conclusion. But for Wolfe, a case wasn't complete until every thread was tied. He sat now in his chair, eyes half shut, a bottle of beer within reach. I'd learned to leave him undisturbed when he wore that look, so I settled with my notebook, waiting. At length he spoke. "Archie, the knife will not reappear in any pawnshop nor in the pocket of a thief. It has served its purpose already. Alcott has hidden it, not for possession but for revelation. To display it would destroy Hubert Hay. To conceal it prolongs suspense. He will not part with it until forced." That was Wolfe's way of saying the case was finished. The confrontation had flushed out the truth, and the knife itself, whether found or not, was merely incidental now. Still, Miss Hay arrived that afternoon, her composure strained, her eyes searching Wolfe's face for something like hope. "Have you recovered it?" she asked. Wolfe shook his head, but his voice was steady. "It is not necessary. The knife exists only as symbol. Its power lies in the knowledge of it, not the steel. That knowledge we now command." She sagged in the chair, relief and disappointment wrestling across her face. "Then Alcott, he will not—" Wolfe cut her off with a sharp gesture. "He will do nothing further. His creed is exposure, not violence, and now that his conviction has been laid bare, he is disarmed. Should he act again, he will be met not with scandal but with ridicule, for the pattern is plain." Miss Hay rose slowly, her hands tightening on her bag. "Then it is finished." Wolfe closed his eyes. "Finished enough. Protect your brother by silence and by distance. And do not presume to summon me again without candor." She nodded, understanding more than she liked, and departed. When the door shut behind her, I turned to Wolfe. "You really think Alcott will sit on it?" Wolfe grunted. "He has already sat for years upon his grievance. He will sit longer still. Exposure without audience is futility, and he knows it. That was that." Fritz announced dinner, the aromas drifting in, pheasant with wine sauce, and Wolfe heaved himself toward the table, as though the world outside had never breached his sanctuary. He paused only once, looking at me with that solemn gravity that comes when he decides to drop philosophy instead of weight. "Archie, men destroy themselves less by what they do than by what they cannot relinquish. Pride, envy, righteousness, these are the true blades. Steel is only a tool." He moved on into the dining room, leaving me with the echo of his words. I closed my notebook, satisfied. The knife that was never found had done its work without ever needing to gleam in the light. And, as always, Wolfe had carved the truth not with hands, but with words. Dinner was served. Justice had been pronounced. And the brownstone was once again inviolate until the next fool came ringing the bell. ChatGPT can make mistakes. Ah.